Hello, my name is Daniel. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to go over a little swords and sorcery. We have Conan of the Isles. Normally I do a weekly wrap-up, however, this is the only book I actually finished, so it would seem kind of weird to do anything other than just a dedicated video to Conan of the Isles. This is sort of I read this sort of in honor of and not necessarily following the rules of Cimmerian September, which is an event by Michael K. Vaughan, who decided that we should read all of the works of Robert E. Howard, at least the Conan works of Robert E. Howard, excuse me. Um, However, I just recently read all of those, and at the time I didn't feel like I really needed to revisit them quite so soon. But I was interested in a lot of the pastiche fiction about Conan because there's a ton of books that came out with this character after the passing of Robert E. Howard. I believe these are some of the first. These were collected by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. They took all of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories and they sort of um, put a heavy editorial hand in recreating them and extrapolating Conan's stories when there were only fragments, or sometimes the stories were featuring other characters, and so they decided to make them into Conan stories because Conan sells. Um, some people have some ethical issues with doing that, especially because at the time, I believe, you couldn't actually buy Conan stories in the original form, so this is all we had. There were 12 original volumes, and then I think Lynn Carter and L. Sprague de Camp added a couple more that weren't in like a chronological sequence like they tried to do with the first 12. This is Conan of the Isles. It is number 12, and this one is a little bit more unique in that Robert E. Howard isn't even credited on the cover of this one. That's because the story in this is based on, I believe, a paragraph that he wrote in a letter saying, "Oh, I would like to write a story about Conan doing this," and so they just took that and ran with it. This is the final, like I said, the final book in the sequence for the Conan. What do you call a 12-volume series? I'm sure there's a word for it, but I don't know it. So for the final volume, they wanted to do Conan versus essentially the Proto-Aztecs. He goes across the Great Ocean and discovers that there are whole new continents left unexplored, and the other continents didn't really know that their continent existed. So essentially, he went to America. The whole driving force of this was like there were these red phantoms that were appearing in multiple kingdoms and like just abducting citizens. Like they just swooped all around until they were essentially gone. It's never really quite clear what happens, other than I believe they were transported to this Aztec-like nation where they were being sacrificed to a dark power. I thought this story was actually really enjoyable. It's odd for a Conan story. I will say Conan is over 60 in this, so he's reaching the end of his lifespan, at least the expected lifespan of a barbarian. He's still very fit and probably stronger than anyone else in the world, but he is feeling his age. And in this book, also, he's a little bit more reminiscent of like the past things. I don't know if that was the author's way of like tying it in with the rest of the series. There are a lot of like mentions of like previous adventures and previous lovers that Conan had. Um, Fortunately, I did not feel lost because I had read all of the Howard stories, and that was all the context I really needed to enjoy this. Um, but you do have like a much more retrospective or introspective, retrospectively introspective. I don't words English. Uh, anyway, you have a lot of much more introspective Conan, where he just like thinks about like this is my most dangerous adventure. This reminds me of this. He does meet up with old friends, and they go on this voyage again across the ocean. There's a lot of fun, like swords and sorcery. That sounded dumb. There are swords and sorcery. Um, there are adventures like in a dungeon like um, environment, which I always really enjoy. I think that's probably because I came to Swords and Sorcery through D&D. So anytime you can go back and like go into some caverns where dark and sinister things are, it's always enjoyable to me. Um, Overall, again, I like this book. It did not read like a Howard Conan book. I don't know how it compares to the other Elsbrag de Camp and Lynn Carter books, but I am very interested in picking them up now. I do want to collect some Conan pastiche, and it really has got me in the mood to read some more Conan, like back to the original stuff. The stuff I thought I didn't need to revisit. I really am starting to feel the need to revisit them already, which is great. So I think this is successful as a Conan novel, mainly because it really reinterested me in thinking back to all those old adventures that they referenced. And I'm like, oh yeah, I would like to read more about his pirating days. That plays a big part into this, probably because he needed to get a ship and a crew together really quickly. So you go to the pirates, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of want to. I kind of want to revisit some of the pirate stories from Conan. So I like this a lot. It's not like a 5-star book or anything, but it is making me nostalgic enough to go back to Conan. So I recommend this a lot, actually. If you can still pick it up, it wasn't all that difficult or expensive. I think it's well worth it, and I will be collecting more of these. Um, so those were the swords of the evening. It's time for a little sorcery. This is a sidebar, so if you just needed the recommendation, yes, pick up Conan of the Isles. It's good, but like I said, it makes me want to read more Conan. So this is something I found. This is a staff I found, or some kind of implement, and I thought it was kind of appropriate for Cimmerian September. This is something I found in my grandfather's basement's ceiling rafters. He had a whole bunch of like staffs and stuff like that, or like uniquely carved and whatnot. I found it long after he had passed away, when I was staying with my grandmother and helping her out when I was like 18 or 19. I stayed with her for a couple months, and just rummaging around and stuff. I found a whole bunch of Zane Grey novels, which were all completely waterlogged and useless. But I'm like, oh, I didn't even know anyone in my family read. So that was interesting. Or they're just random knickknacks that he found. But this is one of the more unique knickknacks that I found. There's like these. I don't know if you can see it really well. These are metal plates, like making like almost like an earring in this upside down head. And then there's carvings that are, I don't know how well that's coming through. There are carvings all over this, including what appears to be a year. And if I can find it, it's either 1891, which is probably the more likely year this was carved, or it's the text is in such a way where it could be 1681, but I think that's really far-fetched. So this is like an old staff that I found in my grandfather's house, and another, sidebar, his nickname and how everyone referred to him growing up was Wizard. So I found a staff at Wizard's house in the like hidden in the ceiling rafters. My grandmother had no idea what this was. So anyway, she's like, "Yeah, you can have it." I'm like, "Sweet, this is one of my most prized possessions." It feels really old. Like this kind of just feels like balsa wood, or something. It's like old and dried out, so it's very fragile. Honestly, there are carvings, like I said. One of them, there's a chunk missing out of it, but I think it says the word well. So I'm wondering if this is like some sort of old dowsing rod. But I just thought it was cool to share. I really love this thing, and we're gonna test right now to see if there's a little bit of magic left in this. So we have Conan of the Isles, but being Cimmerian September, this is not necessarily what we should be reading. So look at that, some actual Howard. So this is sorry. So this is Conan the Cimmerian, the coming of Conan the Cimmerian. This is the first in the 3-volume anthology series of Robert E. Howard's. Or, oh, I should put that down before I do something I regret. Robert E. Howard's original tales in their original form. I read, like I said, I read this edition of all three like 2 years ago. But now I'm gonna go revisit them because it is worth it. It is really good stuff, and I think I'll enjoy it more now that I've been like ramped up for more Conan than I did initially. I don't know. I remember the second volume I just thought was okay, but based on like you know my reading tastes and how they've been evolving, I'm starting to really dig more in the sword and sorcery and the stuff that you'd find in Appendix N of the Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master Guide from first edition way back in the 70s. That's how I came to sword and sorcery. And the more I'm reading, like I'm really enjoying the Fritz Lieber stuff. And that's honestly probably my favorite, but this is really growing on me. So I want to reread these. I think I will enjoy them even more this time around. So I'm looking forward to this, and next time we talk, I'll probably talk about Wolf Hall, which is the series I've am trying to finish right now, which is why I didn't read anything else, is because it's kind of long. My reading with the works of Plato, that's probably going to take till the end of the year, just being honest. It's with unless I were to skim it, which is completely defeats the purpose of philosophy. I really want to take my time with it, so I will probably extend my original project from reading that throughout September until whenever I'm done. Uh, and that's it for today. So I hope you enjoyed it. We will be reading more Conan because it is good stuff. Thank you.